Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today for our informational webinar on the 2024 City of Bellevue Tree Giveaway Program. My name is Kyle Thiessen. I am the Urban Forestry and Climate Engagement CivicSpark Americorps Fellow, which is quite the mouthful. But I'm an Americorps member who's helping out at the city, running our tree giveaway program, as well as helping out with a ton of other sustainability efforts around the city. So today, I just want to introduce you to the tree giveaway program, give you a little more detail on the objectives of the program, how you can use this program to get one or even maybe two free trees, just to help promote tree canopy on private property throughout the city. So in today's agenda, I'll be going over the state of trees in Bellevue at a very high level. I'll give an overview of the tree giveaway program. I'll go into how to choose the right tree species for your situation, as well as giving some more details on the 9 tree species that we have available this year for participants. Finally, I'll just give a few resources at the end, and there will be an opportunity to ask some questions, and I'll provide my email as well for that. So to start, I'm just going to talk a bit about the state of trees in Bellevue today. So this is based on our most recent tree canopy assessment, which is for 2021, but was just released within the last calendar year. So the city of Bellevue has been a Tree City USA since 1990. We've received a Tree Canopy Growth Award from them for 30 years, and we're recognized by the Department of Natural Resources as an urban forestry leader in Washington. And this is really important to us to maintain. It's part of our civic identity and what makes Bellevue such an amazing place to live. So as part of our environmental stewardship plan, we have a goal to grow our tree canopy to at least 40% by 2050. And what's important to note here is that more than 70% of tree planting area is on private property. So, that area that we can actually plant trees in that isn't already built up, that isn't asphalt or in other ways not suitable for planting, 70% of that plantable area is on private property. So this program, we really want to target that and provide residents with the opportunity to help us increase the tree canopy for our city. And to meet our goals, we need to plant an estimated 75,000 trees by 2050. Alternative, we could say that every household could plant a tree to reach that goal. And we also need to protect existing trees. And why is this so important? Trees are essential to making our lives in cities livable and enjoyable. So they help to improve our air quality by trapping particulate matter. They provide ecosystem services such as stormwater management and soil retention. They sequester carbon. They also improve our mental health. We've found in studies that seeing greenery, being amongst trees helps people reduce stress levels, amongst other things. And they're just an essential part of ecosystems in our region. So that brings us to the tree giveaway itself. Now this program is in its 4th year, and we're providing, again, to reiterate, yard trees. We're not providing street trees. These aren't going in the right of way. These are for private property on folks' yards. So we're offering a variety of tree species, 9 this year, and residents can receive up to 2 trees as supplies allow. We're also opening this up to community organizations who can receive up to 20 free trees. So what do you get? Obviously, the free trees, the part that everyone's here for, but we also want to make sure that you have the information that you need to plant a tree that's going to be successful and care for a tree that's going to be viable long term. So we provide you not only with that educational media, but we also want to offer you supplies that will help your tree survive and thrive. That includes watering bags. Those are things that go over the base of your tree. You may have heard them called gator bags. and help provide water during the early years when trees need a lot of water to establish. We also provide you with mulch. Um, and in limited quantities, we have some "We Love Our Trees" yard signs that people love to have up in their yards to show their neighbors how much they love supporting trees in Bellevue. So the state of tree canopy in Bellevue right now, we're looking again to have at least 40% tree canopy by 2050. Now, currently, we're averaging 40% tree canopy across the city. However, you're going to see that that varies widely by neighborhood. If you look at this map here, we're seeing that some neighborhoods are as low as 9 or 14%. And to some extent, that makes sense. Downtown is a very built up area. But you also have other neighborhoods that definitely could have greater tree canopy, whereas others are very well treed. So why is this so important? Well, we also have a loss of trees due to development. This is just a part of the state of Bellevue right now. So we need to do a lot to maintain that 40% average and make sure that we have the tree canopy we need to support our residents going forward. So you can kind of see here that our possible planting area across the city really varies. Again, some neighborhoods like downtown don't have a ton of possible planting area. However, amongst suburban residential areas, that possible planting area is much higher. So 77% of overall possible planting area is in suburban residential neighborhoods. So what I want to dive into here is the fact that these trees in Bellevue are not distributed equally across all neighborhoods. And you'll find that neighborhoods with fewer trees in Bellevue tend to be higher in racial diversity. They tend to have poorer health outcomes as a result of, partially as a result of the lower tree canopy in them. They're hotter. This is due to the effects of the urban heat island. This is where built up areas with more concrete asphalt buildings tend to retain more heat, and in summer especially are more likely to get into these dangerously hot levels. Whereas their areas around them that have more trees or rural areas tend to be a lot cooler, and therefore safer. And what I'm kind of blocking here, sorry, with my video, is that these neighborhoods with lower trees also tend to have less access to parks and open space, which have all these benefits that we know about, like increasing mental health, giving opportunities for people to socialize with friends or just be alone. So we want to extend the benefits of trees to all of Bellevue's residents. So fortunately, there's a great tool from American Forests that allows us to capture a lot of what goes into this unequitable distribution of trees around our city and in cities around the country. So Tree Equity Score groups by census block folks around the city, and helps us to identify those areas that have this combination of folks below the poverty level, folks who are unemployed, the percentage of non-white residents, the ratio of seniors and kids to working age adults, the severity of the urban heat island effect, and a composite index of neighborhood health. So you'll see on this map that while there are areas of the city that have lower tree canopy, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically low tree equity, because they may have residents that are more likely to be able to have the resources and the time to get out into areas that have more trees. They may have better health outcomes. So what we're trying to do with this tool is really capture where trees are needed the most and what we can do as a city and as a program to help promote tree growth within the most targeted and needed areas. So I want to switch gears a bit now and talk about how you can choose the right tree for your home. So folks may have different perceptions of how trees themselves grow. And I wanted to detail a little bit more about that so that we have context for where trees are going to go in your yard and what they need to thrive. So trees have, roots, they have shoots that go out, they have trunks, they need water, nutrients, and sun, so they tend to seek those things, though trees need different amounts of this. And the way that they grow is not quite what we think. While some trees do put down very deep tap roots, in general, most trees tend to grow out in their root systems more than just down, which means that you have to think about where a tree can, expand outwards in its root network to support itself, to keep itself upright, and to have the best chance of, growth and success. Um, Fortunately, trees are often very adaptable, and we've chosen tree species this year that can, work in a lot of different conditions. So we prioritize species that are either currently, native species that are a part of native ecosystems, or are future native, or fully resilient. So all but two of our species this year are current or new natives, or trees that used to have native range here but are moving back in due to the changes in our climate. In general, we are choosing species that are very climate resilient. So as weather becomes more unpredictable, we have more heavy rain or periods of drought. Um, these tend to be trees that are going to be able to survive through that better. We chose trees that are easy to grow and maintain, that are resistant to disease and insects, and we considered that folks have a lot of planting conditions that they need to have a tree for. They have a lot of different space requirements. So we have different sizes of trees. We have trees of different growth rates. Generally, we try to pick trees that grow quicker, um, as well as a variety of different appearances. And we are also, of course, restricted by regional availability, but we also are trying to promote native species, which are, of course, available more around here than they are in the rest of the country. So a quick rundown just so that it's in your head, and I'll go into more detail on these species later. But we have some deciduous trees. These are trees that lose their leaves every year, and evergreen trees that keep their needles or leaves every year throughout the winter. So we have a couple of deciduous species under 25 feet tall. These are ones that you can plant under power lines. These are the serviceberry and the vine maple. We have one deciduous tree over 50 feet, the majestic Gary oak, which many of you will be familiar with. We have some evergreen trees under 25 feet. This is the K. Paris variety of the southern Magnolia grandiflora. And we have the northern spire arborvitae, which is also called a western red cedar. This is a dwarf variety of that. We have the two evergreens between 25 and 50 feet. Again, these are heights at maturity. That's the Bracken's Brown Beauty Magnolia. That's a similar tree to the Cape Harris Magnolia, but a bigger variety with a few different color differences. And then we have the Shore Pine, which is a really iconic native tree to this area. Then finally, we have our two large evergreens that grow to often over 50 feet tall. That's the Coast Redwood and the Douglas Fir. So things to consider as you're deciding which tree to pick. Why are you planting this tree? Do you want to shade your home? Do you want the maximum environmental benefit possible that you can contribute for yourself and your community? Do you want particular aesthetics? What are your conditions? How much space do you have? What is your soil like? And what kind of sun is this tree going to receive? And then what are your preferences? Do you want leafy trees with seasonal colors? Do you want flowering trees? Do you want year-round evergreen tree beauty? This is all things to consider as we look into these species. So there are tons of reasons to plant a tree. I've mentioned a lot of these already. You can cool your home and your neighborhood. There are tons of environmental impacts like supporting, soil retention, having a place for groundwater to go. You can ensure canopy for the future of your neighborhood for future generations. They're great for ensuring privacy. You can build privacy screens or, cover windows from neighbors. And they're also a great way to memorialize important life events. So just in terms of energy saving, a well-placed tree can reduce your cooling costs, your overall electricity bill in the summer by upwards of 30%. That's one great reason to plant certain types of shade trees. And you can also choose deciduous trees that lose their leaves in winter so that you can still get sunlight when, especially in the Pacific Northwest, we really need it the most. And then it's important to consider, what are your conditions? How is the soil? Is it sandy? Is it loamy? Is it clay? I'll give some examples of what that looks like. Do you have shade, partial sun, or full sun? What are your horizontal and vertical space limitations, as well as underground limitations, including utilities? And then what other conditions do you have? Is it particularly wet or dry? Are you on a slope? In terms of soil, you can have sandier soil. This is soil that doesn't stick together and tends to drain water quickly. You can have loamier soil. This is a mix of some clay and some sand and silt. This holds onto water a bit, but drains well, just holds onto moisture. And then clay holds onto a lot of water, doesn't drain as easily, and is a thicker, denser soil. In terms of light, we consider sun conditions to be kind of as follows, with full sun being 6+ hours of sunlight per day, part sun being 3 to 6 hours of sunlight per day, and then shade having no more than 3 hours per day. And that's important to consider as we talk about the light requirements of our various tree species that we're giving away this year. In terms of space, we need to make sure that we're ensuring proper distance from overhead and underground utilities. So always, and I'll talk about this again, and this will be all over the application, but you need to make sure that you call 811 before you dig anywhere in your yard to locate your underground utilities if you haven't already. You have to consider nearby structures, roads, sidewalks, and corners, and then other trees, because trees, of course, do need space to grow. So this is just a real quick rundown of the growth rates of our various trees this year and then their mature heights. We have some smaller species like our serviceberry, our vine maple, our northern spire, and our Cape Harris magnolia. A lot of the trees are going to be growing at around 1 to 2 feet per year, but that depends on sort of meeting their ideal conditions. Trees can grow a lot faster if they have their preferred specific conditions in terms of soil, sun, water, all of those sorts of things. And you'll notice that something like the northern spire will have already reached its full mature height by 10 years or even sooner, which is only about 15 to 20 feet tall and not very wide. So feel free to, if you're watching this recording, just take a moment to pause and look over this. And this information, as far as the mature sizes, is available in our tree reference chart. So we also have our medium to large species here. Notice that the fastest growing species we have is the coast redwood, and especially in ideal conditions, especially when it's young, it'll need a lot of water, but coast redwoods are a great way to establish a large, important keystone tree in your yard that'll grow quickly and provide you with lots of those benefits, such as shade in the summer, and a lot of natural beauty. Of course, they are a very iconic species. So that's our fastest growing species this year. They grow at a rate of 1 to 3 feet per year. And just bear in mind, what's around you. We don't want trees that are covering up road signs that have to be, pruned back into these ugly formations because of roadways. We don't want them eating up fences or having to be carved around power lines. That's just not sustainable. And unfortunately, oftentimes trees do have to be removed because they're planted too close to power lines. Just also consider things like any neighborhood association or HOA requirements. Consider your views. If you plant a tree within a view corridor, you may want to end up cutting it down if it ends up blocking your view when it's mature, and we really don't want that. So think about how it can frame your view rather than block it. And then also consider things like native growth protection areas. If you happen to be located within one of those, you'll notice there's some signs you may have seen around the city that indicate those protection areas. Keep in mind steep slopes and what trees might work well on those if you have any really steep slopes or critical slopes. And then bear in mind, wetlands or waterways either that you are on your property or that are nearby. So in terms of your preferences, think about, do you want seasonal color change? Do you want seasonal flowers? Are you looking for a species that bears fruit, which we have one of this year? How much shade do you want in the future in your yard? And then, In terms of maintenance, do you want to deal with fall raking or other small tasks? Do you want to deal with watering and pruning? Um, so speaking of species that are very easy to maintain, I want to highlight the first of our trees this year, the Gary oak. This is a Pacific Northwest native that has quite a wide range around the area, but is a really essential keystone species for our native ecosystems. Um, it is this beautiful round-shaped tree that grows about as wide as it does tall. That's about 50 to 65 feet in both dimensions, though it is pretty slow growing and will take a little while to get to that mature size. It's not power line safe. You cannot plant this underneath any power lines because it grows much too tall for that. It requires very little water once it's established. All trees are going to require a good bit of water when they're first getting established in their new homes, when they're younger. That's typical, but some trees require a bit more water when they're older. The Gary oak is well adapted to our region and can handle a good amount of climate variation from what we currently experience. So it does not need much water once it's established. In terms of sun, it needs at least partial sun. It can tolerate some shade, but prefers full sun. It also prefers well-drained soil, but it can easily tolerate a variety of soil types as long as you can just avoid seasonally flooding or overly dry soils. And you'll find that as you can see in this little image in the top right-hand corner, its leaves turn a beautiful coppery orange to brown in the fall, and then fall off because this is a deciduous tree. It's also known as the Oregon white oak, and it does drop nice little acorns around your yard. The next tree up is one that I have a personal connection to, having spent a lot of time growing up on the Canadian prairies. This is the serviceberry, also known as the Saskatoon berry, the shadbush, or the juneberry. This is a shrubbier tree that, depending on how you prune it, can be more of a tree shape or more of a bush. At its maximum, it can get to 25 feet tall, but it's typically only about 10 to 15 feet tall at maturity, and its foliage spreads about 10 to 15 feet wide. It's generally pretty slow growing, but you don't have to be too patient because it's not terribly tall at maturity. It is also power line safe because it doesn't grow to be terribly tall. So you'll find that it produces a lot of fruit if you give it its ideal conditions, and less fruit if it has a variety of other conditions which it can still tolerate perfectly well. As far as water goes, of course, all trees need lots of water when they're young and getting established, but once the serviceberry is mature, it needs very little water and very little maintenance overall. In terms of light, it prefers full sun, but it can easily tolerate partial shade. For soil, it prefers moist, well-drained soil, but can also tolerate a variety of other soil types. And then you'll see that it blooms in mid-spring to early summer with these tiny white flowers pictured at the lower right of the images. Then its fruit ripens in early summer, and its leaves will eventually turn red to yellow in fall. So you get lots of seasonal beauty with this before it loses its leaves all winter, as it is a deciduous tree. So the fruit is great eaten fresh. I love them. Other people prefer them in pies or jams. And again, you'll get more fruit in its ideal set of conditions. Next up is another small deciduous tree. This is the vine maple. It grows to about 15 to 25 feet tall with a spread of about 20 feet, which means that it is power line safe. It doesn't need very much water when established because it is native to this region. Again, more water when young, but very low needs when established. It likes partial sun, but prefers full shade, and it will not thrive in full sun. So this is a great tree, as pictured in this image, to put up against your house, to put amongst other trees to fill out your ground canopy, your lower mid canopy, but should not go in full sun. In terms of soil, it prefers moist, well-drained soil, but it can tolerate a range from somewhat dry to more wet soils. And in terms of seasonal colors, it will turn a very vibrant red, orange, yellow in fall, and its leaves open to be a little bit reddish in spring as well. So you get a variety of colors all throughout the year, but it will lose its leaves in winter because it is a deciduous tree. So this is a native leafy maple that is great in shade or as an understory tree, and is really preferred for screening, for privacy, or for ornamental planting in yards. Next up, we have a small evergreen native tree. This is the Northern Spire variety of Arbor Vitae, or sometimes known as Western Red Cedar. These grow to about 15 to 20 feet tall, so they are totally power line safe, but they only grow to be 4 to 6 feet wide. So this is actually a great tree to put with others of its kind to create a privacy screen, or they're great for filling in patches in landscaping or as a small feature tree. They're a very beautiful, shapely, conical species to put in your yard. In terms of water, because they're native, they have lower to moderate watering requirements once they're established. They do well in full sun to partial shade, and they prefer partial sun. In terms of soil, they grow best in moist, well-drained soil, but they can tolerate some wetness in soils and a variety of different soil types. In terms of colors, they do actually turn a bit red-brown in fall. Parts of the tree will, and that'll stay over winter. But again, these are evergreens, so they'll generally keep their green color, and they won't really lose many of their leaves, their scaly leaves, throughout the year. And again, this is a native Western red cedar, and it really requires very little maintenance. Just in hotter and drier summers may need a little bit more water. Next up is one of our large evergreen species. This is a personal favorite of mine, the coast redwood. These are a super iconic species that you'll see on the Northern California coast. And while they're not currently native to our part of the Pacific Northwest, they've historically had a very wide range spreading all the way up through British Columbia. And they are well adapted to some of the changes that are happening because of climate change. So they're a really great new keystone species to be planting in this area that a lot of people consider to be a new native species. So in terms of height, in the wild, of course, these can grow to be several hundred feet tall. However, in cities, that's much less. In cities, they tend to grow to only a maximum of about 70 feet. Their foliage can spread to be upwards of 30 feet wide. They have this very nice conical shape, and they're very fast growing. So in terms of the trees that we're providing this year, this tree species will give you the quickest amount of growth, so the quickest amount of foliage and shade in your yard, if that's what you're looking for. And they're very much not power line safe, as you can imagine. These are far too tall to plant under power lines. But yeah, they can grow 2 to 3 feet per year in ideal conditions, even quicker than that. In terms of watering, once they're established, they have very low watering requirements for fall, winter, and spring, and then you may need to water them a little bit more in summer. Of course, when they're young, they need tons of water to get established, especially in summer. In terms of light, they prefer full sun and they can tolerate some shade. Of course, once they are mature, they will be getting access to lots of sun because of their height. They prefer moist, well-drained soil, and they don't change much throughout the year. They are an evergreen that they produce some small cones, but that's about it. So I think that a lot of people are initially afraid of planting a larger species like this. I will say that the coast redwood you can find in people's yards all throughout the region and also in our parks. They do really well around here, and you'll find that this is something that people come to admire, and you'll probably come to admire too, as a beautiful feature of where you live. So I would really encourage, if you're having some initial hesitancies, definitely feel free to reach out with questions and see if a large species like the coast redwood or the Douglas fir that I'm about to talk about are a good fit for your home. So the other large evergreen we're giving away this year is the iconic Douglas fir. This is a very important keystone species for Northwest ecosystems and forests. It is a beautiful stately tree that was unfortunately logged heavily when white settlers came to this part of the country. So we do not have a ton of our old growth Douglas fir forests remaining. but in the wild, they can grow to be some of the tallest trees on the planet. Now, that's not the case in cities. Typically, they only grow to be about 40 to 80 feet tall. You'll see this example is a very beautiful mature Douglas fir in Seattle. And they are a pretty fast growing species in good conditions, easily 1 to 2 feet or more per year. They get a foliage spread that's about 12 to 20 feet wide, sometimes a bit wider than that. But that means that they, despite being pretty tall, actually can exist in a good variety of yard conditions despite people's initial reservations because of their potential height. Once they're established, they require very little water and they're very low maintenance. Of course, you cannot plant this under power lines. It's much too tall for that. But because of its height, it will eventually get lots of sun and it can tolerate some partial shade when it's young, but tends to prefer full sun. In terms of soil conditions, it prefers moist, well-drained soils and can tolerate a low moisture soil. A bit of dryness is fine for the Douglas fir when it's mature. So it is an evergreen, doesn't change much throughout the season, but does produce cones. And you'll find that they have a really attractive pyramidal sort of shape to them, and you won't need to maintain them much once they're mature. Next up is another super iconic Northwest evergreen. This is the shore pine. You'll also hear it called the lodgepole pine or the twisted pine. So the shore pines are a less tall variant of this Pinus contorta that you find all around the Northwest. They grow to about 40 to 50 feet tall with a foliage spread of 12 to 20 feet wide. That's really variable depending on whether you decide to let it grow as it will. On its own, it'll form these very interesting branching shapes. You'll see them really iconically on the coast, like in that top left photo. They'll often look very rugged, and they're a really popular species for bonsai, and also to be emulated in bonsai. But if you choose to prune them, you can make them into really interesting landscape features. And they're just super emblematic of the Northwest. I think that they're a great add to people's yards. So they require very little water once they're mature. They're not power line safe because they do grow to be a bit too tall for that, but they can live in a ton of different conditions as long as they have full sun. They really prefer full sun, but other things are totally negotiable. They'll love well-drained or sandy soil, but they'll adapt to tons of different soil conditions, including very rocky soils. They're also even fine with boggy soils. You'll see them on the coast of the Pacific Northwest in all tons of different conditions, right next to dunes, in really rocky areas. They're happy with a lot of different conditions. So they are an evergreen and they produce some cones as well, but you won't see them change much throughout the year. And they provide a lot of visual interest to your yard. So I think that this is an often overlooked species and as far as what people are buying from nurseries, but you'll find these across a lot of very beautifully landscaped yards around the area. Next is one of our two magnolia species we're giving away this year. This is the larger of the two. It's the Bracken's Brown Beauty Magnolia grandiflora. This is also called a southern magnolia, and this particular variety does really well in our region. It grows to between 30 and 50 feet tall and typically has a foliage spread of about 15 to 30 feet wide. That means it's not power line safe. It gets a bit too tall for that. In terms of its watering needs, it will require a bit more water than some of these once established. Nothing super intense, but you'll need to keep watering it, especially during summers once it's mature. And then, of course, more water when it's young. In terms of light, it prefers full sun, but can do well in partial shade. And it prefers moist, well-drained soils, but can also tolerate more damp conditions. So these are an evergreen species. They don't have any needles, but they have these big, thick leaves. And you'll notice that the undersides of these leaves, they turn this beautiful brown color in fall, which persists through winter. And they also develop these beautiful, large, white, fragrant flowers. They're about 5 to 6 inches wide, actually. And these, you'll notice around Seattle, they come out in spring to early summer and are just a super beautiful add to your yard at that time of year. They generally have a more oval shape and have a lower canopy. So this variety of magnolia will only usually be a little over 3 feet off the ground. This example in the photo has foliage that is a little further off the ground, but it has a very beautiful full shape with lots of these big leaves. You just want to be sure to keep any gardening away from the roots of this tree because its roots are a little more delicate. And while this is not a native species, it is also not invasive, so there's no problem planting this tree worrying about native ecosystems. And finally, our small species of magnolia. This is a dwarf variety of the Magnolia grandiflora called K. paris. This grows to be 15 to 20 feet high and 8 to 10 feet wide, meaning that it's great for planting under power lines. It requires, again, moderate water once established. It's not native to the region, but it's also not invasive. So it'll just require a bit more water and care. It also likes anything from full sun to partial shade and prefers moist, well-drained soils with tolerance for damp conditions. Now, the differences between this and the prior magnolia species, aside from their size, is that the leaves of the K. paris don't turn quite as brown. Again, it does keep its leaves all winter because it's evergreen, but it gets even bigger blossoms that are also very fragrant in late spring. So you'll notice these pretty small trees that have 8 to 10 inch wide flowers that are very thick and kind of buttery feeling. They're a really beautiful flower. So they have a pretty straight trunk and a pyramidal foliage shape. So they're a great add to your landscaping and provide some nice shade and fullness with very glossy, dense green leaves. Again, these have the delicate roots of all magnolias, so you really want to keep gardening activity away from the roots of this tree. And yeah, it's a great addition to your yard that can fit in a lot of different places because of its size. So in terms of what trees need, especially when they're young, it's really important that trees get lots of water. They may need some fertilizer that could be from compost, it could be fertilizer that you purchase. They'll need some pruning depending on how you want them to grow. And this is all detailed in our basic tree care guides, but there's plenty of other resources too, resources specific to your tree species as well. So of course, it's very encouraged to look up, any more detailed instructions for some of these species, but we have some resources as well available on the website. If you want to learn how to prune your trees yourself, we have a City of Bellevue guide. Also, Plant Amnesty has video guides for many different types of trees in English and Spanish. So you can learn how to prune yourself there, but also it's recommended if you're not super comfortable learning how. We have lots of arborists around Bellevue that can do a great job of this for you. So if you do decide to take care of some of this yourself, it's good to consider when you should call a professional arborist, and definitely consider calling if you need to climb a ladder to prune. Also, if you need to prune a branch that's more than 3 inches in diameter. Also, if you happen to notice any new mushrooms, any new holes, or any creaking in the tree, that's a really good time to call out an arborist. If you've just moved into a new place and you don't know when the last time a tree was assessed, a mature tree was assessed, you should definitely call an arborist to get that looked at. And then if you have a large tree that needs pruning, or if it overhangs a building, definitely consider calling an arborist. So I just wanted to run over what you can expect from the application for the tree giveaway program. So this application is hosted online on our tree giveaway website, and it will be open from June 25th to August 18th, 2024. After August 18th, we'll close the application and review everybody's applications that were submitted. We will be prioritizing the applicants from neighborhoods with lower tree equity scores, as mentioned earlier in the presentation. And for everybody else, you can expect to receive your preference of trees just based on supply We have, of course, a limited supply of trees. We do have 700 trees this year, but we expect to have more applicants than that. And if it's anything like last year, we can expect that a lot of folks will be put on a wait list. That's folks who either did not receive any trees assignment or were not happy with the trees that they're assigned. You're more than welcome to then join our wait list, which allows you to choose from any leftover trees that were not picked up after our giveaway event finishes. So the giveaway event itself will be on October 25th and 26th at Bannerwood Park, in kind of centrally located in Bellevue. So anybody who's on the wait list who did not get the tree that they were initially hoping for, those folks can then show up after the event and look through any remaining trees. However, we hope that most folks will be able to get their first, second, or third choice of tree that they indicate on our application. Also on that application, you can expect to go through a bit of a training because we want to make sure that you have all the information you need to plant and care for a successful tree. So that involves some written and video information and a short quiz. Then we'll just ask you for some info and you'll get a chance, as mentioned, to mark down what your first, second, and third choice trees are. And then we have some optional demographic information we ask. So all of that should take about 15 minutes, and expect to do that all in one sitting because the application doesn't auto-save if you leave halfway through. So just try and set aside 10 to 20 minutes to get this application done. It's pretty simple, but if you have any questions, of course, you can contact me at the trees@bellevuewa.gov email, which is again on the slides. So definitely feel free to get in contact, but it should be a pretty simple application, and hoping that lots of folks are happy with the trees that they're assigned. So I just wanted to point your attention to a few resources as we wrap up. Especially the King County Master Gardeners are a great resource for tree planting, for general gardening advice. There are great directories for how to find an arborist, and definitely check out some of the information from Plant Amnesty if you're thinking of doing some of this pruning yourself. So just a few city resources before we wrap up. We do have tree care and tree giveaway information available on our website, www.bellevuewa.gov/trees. And if you think you might live in a critical area, definitely get in contact with Development Services at that number and email address. And if you have further questions about which tree is right for you in your neighborhood and your yard, definitely reach out to trees@bellevuewa.gov, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. I really look forward to seeing your applications rolling in and to getting these amazing tree species out to you. So thank you so much for being here today and taking a look at our presentation. And I really look forward to hearing from many of you soon.